Okay, let's dive into this because Ibn Khaldun anchors his entire sociological theory on a really brilliant biological metaphor. As he puts it, the state has natural ages just like individuals. Just as a human being goes through infancy, youth, maturity, and eventually senility, a political dynasty goes through the exact same life cycle. He observed that humans simply cannot cheat old age, right? Well, neither can an empire. And this wasn't just poetic language for him. To him, this was a strict scientific rule that governs literally all of human history. And because he viewed this as a biological certainty, Ibn Khaldun actually put a hard number on it, 120. He deduced that the natural, unhindered lifespan of a dynasty is exactly 120 years. Drawing on astrological observations of his time, astronomical cycles, and basically the natural limits of human age, he created this immediate, rigid sense of structure. An empire literally has a ticking clock from the very moment it's born. But how did those 120 years actually play out? Here is our roadmap. Number 1, the DNA of power. 2, the 120-year lifespan. 3, the 5 stages of dynasty. 4, Khilafah versus Mulk. And 5, historical cases in action.
Section 1, the DNA of power.
So the crucial point is understanding the fundamental building block of any empire's rise. If a dynasty is a living organism, its absolute fundamental DNA is Asabiyya. You can translate this as tribal solidarity or social cohesion. You see, in really harsh desert conditions, survival is just impossible without this unbreakable bond. It generates mutual defense, incredible strength, and eventually, it's what drives a marginalized group to conquer. But more importantly, Ibn Khaldun argues that this deep solidarity is what actually allows a society to achieve total self-sufficiency at maturity. Without Asabiyya, that self-sufficiency and ultimate victory are entirely impossible. It's the raw, pulsing energy that propels a marginalized group straight to the center of power. But Ibn Khaldun noticed something else too. When you add religion to the mix, you get what we can kind of call the divine multiplier. A shared religious call, or a dawah, acts as a massive force multiplier for that asabiyya. It completely wipes away petty internal tribal rivalries, jealousy, competition, and it replaces them with a unified divine mission. The group becomes practically unstoppable. But there is a very realist warning here from Khaldun. A divine mission cannot succeed on its own. If you have a religious calling, a dawah, but you lack that underlying social cohesion, your movement will fail. You absolutely have to have the physical, social muscle to carry the spiritual message. Section 2, the 120-year lifespan. So remember that 120-year rule we talked about earlier? Ibn Khaldun divided it into the rule of 3 generations, with each one lasting roughly 40 years. The first generation, we can call them the builders. They've just conquered the cities. They still retain all their desert toughness, their raw courage, and their incredibly strong asabiyya. They are feared and respected. Then comes the second generation, the enjoyers. Now they grow up in the city, not the harsh desert. They shift to sedentary luxury. They prefer comfortable palaces over tents. And because life is easier, their tribal solidarity weakens, and they start relying on mercenaries or paid armies instead of their own brethren. Finally, you get the third generation, the squanderers. These people are born into total luxury. They've completely forgotten the tough life of their ancestors. They're totally reliant on the state for protection, they're obsessed with consuming wealth, and that crucial asabiyya, it is entirely destroyed. By the end of this generation, the state is completely ripe for the picking by a new, hungry tribe from the outside. Section 3, the 5 stages of dynasty. Let's move to the political structure and see how this builds, because zooming in, we get a very precise 5-step biological aging process. Stage 1 is conquest, where shared solidarity overthrows the old regime. But in Stage 2 consolidation, the dynamic shifts. The ruler stops sharing power, basically monopolizing authority and glory entirely for himself. By Stage 3, leisure, the ruler focuses almost completely on wealth, luxury, and ease. Stage 4 is contentment. This is a passive imitation of the past, where they're happy to just maintain the status quo without any new ambition. Finally, Stage 5 brings decay. The rulers become utterly extravagant, squandering wealth on their appetites until the state literally enters senility, just waiting to die. Section 4, Khilafah versus Mulk. Now, as the dynasty matures, the very soul of the state fundamentally transforms. Ibn Khaldun makes this brilliant distinction between 2 types of authority. First is the Khalifa or Caliphate, which also encompasses the imamate. This is governance based purely on divine law, aimed at the ultimate good of the people in both this world and the afterlife, and it's characterized by justice. But inevitably, as the state consolidates power, this morphs into mulk, kingship. Mulk is based purely on force, worldly luxury, and a strict monopoly on glory. The ruler separates himself from the people, sits behind veils, and uses power merely to maintain his own dominance and comfort. For Ibn Khaldun, this transition isn't just a mistake, it's an unavoidable byproduct of civilization and wealth. So how exactly does the organism die? Well, first it hits a territorial ceiling. An empire can only expand as far as its population and its Asabiyya can physically protect it. If you stretch too far, the outer edges become weak and just break off. Second is the cost of luxury. Extravagant lifestyles demand aggressive, heavy, and frankly unjust taxation, which completely ruins the economy. Finally, you get the erosion of loyalty. To enforce those taxes and maintain control as their popularity plummets, rulers turn to oppression and sharp punishments. And this completely shatters any remaining social cohesion. The kingdom destroys itself from within long before the final external blow even lands. Section 5. Historical cases in action. And this brilliantly illustrates his point because Ibn Khaldun didn't just invent this in a vacuum. He performed a massive historical autopsy. The giant empires of Islamic history perfectly followed his biological model. Just look at the Abbasids in Baghdad. They started with fierce solidarity, but over generations, they fell into luxury, lost their Asabiyya, and ended up as mere figureheads, while the Seljuks, the Buyids, and eventually the Mongols tore the whole empire apart. The Umayyads in Andalusia followed the exact same trajectory. Once their central driving cohesion dissolved into a love of sedentary luxury, the empire splintered into the weak, divided Taifa states. And the Fatimids or Ubaydids, spanning North Africa and Egypt, experienced the exact same fate. Their initial powerful cohesion was corrupted by the very wealth and power they attained, leading to their eventual eclipse. They all aged and they all decayed. Which brings us to a sobering yet deeply insightful conclusion derived directly from his work. Every dynasty has a natural expiration date. No matter how powerful the Asabiyya was at the very beginning, no matter how grand the Dawah, or how incredibly wealthy the kingship became during that leisure stage, the laws of sociological biology always win. Luxury breeds weakness, and weakness breeds collapse. The human lifespan metaphor is basically inescapable. So I really want to leave you with this final thought. We've spent the last few minutes dissecting a 14th century masterclass in how empires rise, age, and fall. We've looked at the builders, the enjoyers, and the squanderers. If Ibn Khaldun is right, and history strongly suggests he is, that every society acts like a biological organism with a natural expiration date, what stage of the cycle are we in today? Are we building, are we enjoying, or are we squandering? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.